Subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon so that you know when live we go. Hello and welcome to today's DNS session. We are going to have a discussion on today's newspaper, The Hindu, Delhi edition dated 10th of April 2021. We shall pick up articles important for civil service examination and discuss them as per the demand of the exam. The articles that we are going to take up for today's discussion are there on your screen, and the timestamping for the same has been provided in the description. On page number 1, there is a news article, India protests US naval exercise. And a related news article on page number 8, nod required for exercises. This is the position of India. First of all, let me tell you what the news is. US Navy has come with a press release saying that its ship with the name USS John Paul Jones has carried out freedom of navigation operation in Indian exclusive economic zone. According to the US Navy, they have asserted their navigational rights and freedom approximately 130 nautical miles west of Lakshadweep Island. The problem is 130 nautical miles will lie inside India's exclusive economic zone, which extends till 200 nautical miles. And India's consent to do the military maneuvering was not sought. Why US did it? US did it to challenge what US calls India's excessive maritime claims. US has been doing it since the time US was unchallenged, from the time of 1970s. US pretext for India is that India requires prior consent for military exercises or military maneuvering in its exclusive economic zone or the continental shelf. But this, according to US interpretation, is inconsistent with international law. The freedom of navigation operation of US is not exclusive to one country or one region. Department of Defense of US comes up with annual freedom of navigation report. And India has been mentioned in 2019 report as country with excessive maritime claim. This mention of India has been done multiple times before. In fact, this mention has been done since 1980s. So there are two things for you to pick up initially. First, that this exercise is being carried out since 1970s, and US does it in all region in Indo-Pacific, Atlantic, and it does it for its allies as well. What is India's stand, India's perspective on the incident? Government of India is very clear on this issue since long. The position of Government of India is this. United Nations Convention on Laws of the Sea does not authorize any state to carry out in the exclusive economic zone or in the continental shelf any military maneuvering, in particular those involving weapons or explosives, without the consent of the coastal state. So United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea is very clear on this. You need to have consent of the coastal state for military maneuvering in the exclusive economic zone. And that is why India has said that nod is actually required. You need to take consent for carrying out any military exercise or even military maneuvering that will include passage of a military ship. United Nations Convention on Law of the Sea came into picture in 1982. Even before that, in 1976, there were national laws governing the issue of governance in the exclusive economic zone and adjoining region. The Territorial Waters, Continental Shelf, Exclusive Economic Zone and Other Maritime Zone Act 1976 says that all foreign ships other than warships, including submarines and other underwater vehicles, shall enjoy the right of innocent passage through the territorial waters. What is innocent passage? Any passage, so long it is not prejudicial to peace, good order and security of India, which is little subjective but definitely will exclude foreign warships. And as per India's domestic law, all foreign warships, including submarines and other underwater vehicles, will require prior permission from the central government to pass through the territorial waters. The long and short of the issue is this. You require consent of the coastal state. And this requirement of consent comes both from the United Nations Convention on Laws of the Sea and India's domestic law governing the maritime zones. But the problem is this. Even though India has ratified the United Nations Convention on Law of the Sea in 1995, US has not done it so far. So US naturally cannot get into the nitty-gritty of the convention. US also cannot get engaged into the dispute resolution mechanism under the convention. So what US can do? US can come up with ideas like excessive maritime claims and say that the states they themselves are not following the convention by having excessive maritime claims, which is inconsistent as per the provision of the convention. That's the way it can play around the provisions of the convention even though itself not ratifying it. Another problem is US is not being consistent with its stand on United Nations Convention on Laws of the Sea. When it comes to military operation of US in the state of Oman, which US very elaborately does, inconsistency of US comes into picture. The state of Oman requires prior permission even for innocent passage, which India allows without prior permission. But there US does everything with prior permission of the state. So not taking permission in case of India is obviously being inconsistent. From here there are two things that needs to be done in this topic. One is to look at the incident from the geostrategic lens. And second, for a better understanding and also important for the prelims exam, is to look into the provisions of United Nations Convention on Law of the Sea. Beginning from the first aspect, it is little puzzling as to why the United States Navy came up with a press release. If US does the operation in South China Sea and make a hoo-ha about it, that is understandable. One will get the message that US is trying to convey a message to China that the exclusive economic zone that it is trying to amass around artificial islands amounts to excessive maritime claim. But doing the same vis-a-vis India is little puzzling. The public announcement by the US Navy has been done at a time when the military cooperation between India and US is on the rise. On the day this operation was carried out, India was actually engaging with US in a military exercise. The exercise, RAU'S exercise, this is led by France, began in 2019 and then it was participated by France, Japan, US and Australia. This year, for the first time, all the 4 Quad nations along with France were participating in the exercise. Last month, US Secretary of Defense visited India and gave the commitment for strengthening the bilateral defense relations between the two countries. India and US also have signed joint strategic vision for enhanced cooperation in the Indian Ocean and Asia-Pacific region. The quadrilateral grouping or Quad has been strengthened. What began in 2007 was broken up, Australia pulled out, and for the first time again, all the 4 nations participated in the Malabar exercise. So there is an upswing in the defense relation between India and US. Then why this has happened and why the public pronouncement of it? Perhaps let's just hope this is one offbeat, isolated incident and will not affect the geostrategic relation of India and US. Now let's talk about United Nations Convention on Law of the Sea. This convention was adopted in 1982. India became party to it in 1995. This convention divides the marine areas into 5 zones. We'll talk about these 5 zones very shortly. This actually is the only international convention which actually stipulates a framework for state jurisdiction, framework for giving legal status to different maritime zones, and the framework defining the coastal states' rights and responsibilities. Overall, setting up a framework of governance in coastal regions and in the high seas. The United Nations Convention on Law of the Sea divides the maritime region into 5 zones: internal waters, territorial sea, contiguous zone, exclusive economic zone, and high seas. Internal water region extends from the land right till the baseline. Baseline generally is considered as the low water line along the coast, meaning the line below which the water does not recede. Internal water will include bays, ports, inlets, rivers, and even the lakes which are connected with the sea. The sovereignty of a state in the internal water region is just the same as the sovereignty exercised on land. The internal water region is completely within the jurisdiction of the state. Nobody can intrude into this region. There is no right of passage in this region, not even the right of innocent passage. The next zone is territorial sea, and it extends 12 nautical miles seaward from the baseline. The funda of nautical mile is related with the curvature, the circumference of Earth. 1 nautical mile is the length of the segment corresponding to 1 degree. The length of the segment on the surface of the Earth corresponding to 1 degree is 1 nautical mile. 1 nautical mile is 1.15 times of 1 land mile and around 1.85 kilometer. The coastal states have sovereignty and jurisdiction over territorial seas as well. The jurisdiction is not only on the sea, but in the air above, the water below, and the land beneath. The sovereignty extends to all over territorial sea, above it, below it. The only difference in the territorial sea from the internal water region is that there is right to innocent passage. Extending 12 nautical miles from the territorial sea in the seaward direction, the region is called as contiguous zone. It is an intermediary zone between the territorial sea and the high sea. The sovereignty of the state also extends in the contiguous zone. The laws of the state will apply here. The coastal state has all the right to prevent and punish for infringement of laws. The fiscal, immigration, sanitary, customs laws, any laws. The Enrique Lexi case, if you remember, the case of which is about to get closed, that happened in the region around 20.5 nautical miles. This will be within 24 nautical mile from the baseline, and Indian law apply here. That's how we interpret it, and that's why we proceeded with the judicial proceeding against the mariners. But there is one difference in the contiguous zone from the territorial sea. In territorial sea, you have rights everywhere, above the territorial sea, on the territorial sea, and below the territorial sea. But in the contiguous zone, you have right on the sea and you have right below the sea. You do not have right in the airspace. So the coastal states have the right to control the airspace in the territorial sea, but they do not enjoy that right in the contiguous zone. Exclusive economic zone is the region extending 200 nautical miles from the baseline. As the name suggests, this is exclusive economic zone, meaning the resource right of the coastal state is exclusive in this region. The states have the power to explore minerals, to extract the minerals, conserve them, manage them, take whatever project they wish. The coastal states also has the right of production of energy from water, currents, wind in the region. But unlike territorial sea and contiguous zone, there is only resource right here. The complete jurisdiction of the state is not there in this region, meaning the domestic laws as such will not apply by default. At this point, you need to know two things. Section 188A of CRPC and Section 7 Clause 7 of Maritime Zone Act 1976 provides that India can proceed against any person who commits a crime in its exclusive economic zone. However, as you would understand that both these notifications, they were made before the UNC laws came into picture. And our interpretation is that laws that India had before UNC laws came into picture will still hold. And even in case of a conflict, the domestic laws will prevail. In this regard, with regard to criminal procedure initiation in the exclusive economic zone, there is a conflict. And our position is that the domestic laws will prevail. Beyond exclusive economic zone, you have the region of high seas, and there is no jurisdiction of any state whatsoever in this region. These regions are considered as the common heritage of all mankind. Let me re-emphasize one very important point once again. This classification of 5 zones of maritime region is not applicable in case of artificial islands. So if a country is busy making artificial islands, hoping to amass more and more exclusive economic zones, then actually the provisions will not apply for artificial islands. Secondly, on the issue of resolution of differences between India and US vis-a-vis UNC laws and the claim of US that India has excessive maritime claim, India and US will have to do some rapprochement. US must first of all ratify the convention, and India on its part can make the domestic laws in consonance with the international convention. Any misunderstanding differences vis-a-vis maritime governance must be resolved fast, because US and India share joint strategic vision in the Indian Ocean region. and the defense partnership of the two countries must only be strengthened and not get debilitated for any reason. There is a news article on page number 14 saying that net direct tax receipt has risen by 5%. Compared to the last financial year, in this financial year, the direct tax collection has increased by 5%. Sometimes helpful to have an idea of absolute amount. This is around 9.45 lakh crore. Around 104.5% more than the revised estimate of 9.05 lakh crore in the budget. In the direct tax collection, personal income tax is slightly more than the corporate tax. The personal income tax will also include the security transaction tax, the tax that you have to give to the government on profits when you sell the shares. The overall picture of gross tax revenue looks like this. I don't know if you are able to see this picture clearly, but the picture is this. In the gross tax revenue, 55% is direct tax, 45% indirect tax. Out of this 55% of direct tax, corporate tax is around 28%. And income tax, including the security transaction tax, is 28%. So immediately you must freeze two things in your mind. In the gross tax revenue, direct tax share is more than indirect, which is a good thing. Because taxation slab in direct tax is progressive. The more is your income, the higher percentage of tax applies to you. In indirect tax, everybody pays the same tax. If you buy a packet of biscuit, you or any other person much richer than you pays the same tax. So number one, direct tax composition in the gross tax revenue is more than the indirect. And this is the case only since last few years. And number two, in the direct tax composition, the corporate tax is more than income tax. And let me tell you number three, the direct tax collection has been increasing year on year consistently till the financial year 2018-19. In the financial year 2019-20, however, there was a dip in direct tax collection by around 5%. And in the financial year 2020-21, as we have seen already, there has been increase in the direct tax by around 5%. So barring this financial year of 2019-20, the direct tax has been increasing year on year in the last decade. In the financial year 2019-20 and in the preceding year, government took lots of tax reform. There were many tax reductions and the tax refund by the government was also very high that year. Because of that, the revenue dipped. So the reason for the fall in the tax revenue collection in the financial year 2019-20 is the same as the reason for the rise in direct tax revenue collection for the financial year 2020-21. And they are related to the tax reform that the government has taken in the preceding 2 years. One of that is tax rate reduction. The corporate tax has been reduced to 22%. New manufacturing domestic companies, for them, the tax rate has been reduced to 15%. The minimum alternate tax rate has been reduced from 18.5% to 15%. Minimum alternate tax were introduced through the Finance Bill of 1987, but it was implemented for the year 1988-89. It was withdrawn in the year 1990 and reintroduced in the year 1996. The idea was that many companies, they used to take tax rebate through the various provisions that government offers, and their tax liability reduced to around zero. They paid very little tax or absolutely no tax. So this concept of minimum alternate tax was brought so that some minimum tax must be paid by all companies. Then government exempted for income tax individuals whose earning less than rupees 5 lakh. The standard deduction was also increased from rupees 40,000 to rupees 50,000. Through the Finance Act of 2020, dividend distribution tax was removed altogether. This is the tax that you have to pay when companies share profit in the equity market with you. The immediate effect of all these tax reduction was the direct tax revenue fell. The direct tax revenue fell in the succeeding year. But also the direct tax revenue increased in the next succeeding year. There has been an estimated increase in the corporate tax by rupees 1.45 lakh crore and in the personal income tax by rupees 23,200 crore. This increase has been on account of tax reduction. You must have heard of Laffer curve. This curve shows the relation between the tax rates and the amount of tax revenue collected by the government. If you keep the tax rate very low, obviously the tax revenue collection will be low. But also if you keep the tax rate very high, the tax revenue collection will be low. Because if you put very high burden on people, people will do tax avoidance. Perhaps the Indian economy was somewhere here. When you reduce the tax rate, tax revenue collection automatically increased. Government of India also has come up with other reforms. For example, Vivad se Vishwas scheme. Under this scheme, people can come clean with regard to their income tax returns. There will be complete waiver on interest and penalty. You just have to pay the tax for the stipulated period. Due to digital transactions, the tax base also has increased. The number of people filing tax returns have enormously increased. Tax reforms also has been done to increase the ease of filing tax. So the cumulative effort of all these tax reform is that the direct tax buoyancy has increased. It has been estimated by the Finance Ministry that the tax buoyancy for direct tax is around 1.12. For corporate tax, it is around 1, and for personal income tax, it is 1.32. Tax buoyancy shows the growth in the tax revenue compared to the growth in GDP. And in this challenging time of COVID-19 pandemic, if the tax buoyancy is higher for direct tax, that means that the tax collection administration is healthy. The reforms that the government has taken is yielding results. This is the lead article from page number 6. India does have a refugee problem. The problem that the author is highlighting is centrally this. The legal jurisprudence in India, or the administrative framework, does not differentiate between refugee and illegal migrant. Because India basically does not have any statutory definition of refugee. The definition, however, is present in the Refugee Convention 1951. This convention of UN defined refugees as any person fleeing prosecution on ground of race, religion, nationality, social group, or political opinion. The convention makes it obligatory to the signatories to make available to the refugees legal rights. That will include the right to education, work, and property. The Refugee Convention of 1951 also has a very important principle called as principle of non-refoulement, meaning that the states will not send back refugees to get prosecuted back in their home countries. However, India is not party to 1951 Refugee Convention or its 1967 Protocol. So this basic definition of refugee does not apply in Indian context. Further, Citizenship Act 1955 also does not define the term refugee. The Foreigners Act 1946 defines foreigners as a person who is not a citizen of India. But the act is silent as to who are refugees and illegal migrants. So all in all, we do not have basic definition of refugee. And that, according to the author, is the governance challenge with regard to refugees. India not only not has the definition of refugee, but India also does not have any national refugee protection framework or any law relating to domestic asylums. But despite this, India has set a stellar example of receiving refugees from all over the world. As a matter of fact, India hosts the highest number of refugees in the world. Sri Lankan Tamils, Tibetans coming from China, the Chin minorities of Myanmar, Hindus coming from Bangladesh and Pakistan, Persians, Jews, they all have been welcomed time and again by India. India, although not a signatory to United Nations Refugee Convention 1951, but India is a signatory to New York Declaration for Refugees and Migrants. This is more holistic in nature and was adopted by 193 countries in 2016. This declaration has set a framework for refugee protection called as Global Compact on Refugees. One important thing to know about it, there is a provision of financial burden sharing, meaning the rich countries, they have to contribute more to the cause of refugee protection because generally it is the middle income countries that host larger population of refugee. You should also know that India has signed UN Anti-Torture Convention. And this convention has a principle of non-refoulement. By signing this convention, India showed the readiness to accept this principle of non-refoulement. But India has not ratified this convention. And India is only one of the 5 countries that has not ratified it. So you understand that India is a country that is leading in hosting refugees from all over the world. But at the same time, our refugee policy is not very clear. And there are historical reasons as to why we do not have adopted a clear refugee policy. And by extension, why we have not signed UN Refugee Convention 1951. First and foremost, India was not involved in the preliminary discussion for the convention. Second of all, the convention is legally binding. And back then, immediately after independence, India was not ready to put itself into a legally binding convention vis-à-vis refugees. It was also India's stand that this Refugee Convention of 1951 was tailor-made to fit the requirement of post-World War II European countries. And the principle of non-refoulement was essentially seen in this context. But India was not ready for this principle because India had real threat of hostile neighborhood from Western Pakistan, Eastern Pakistan and China. We had very porous border back then. Internal security threat would have been grave because of illegal migration, also because of concern of radicalization from the neighbor state. Also, the Refugee Convention of 1951 did not have any financial burden sharing provision, as the New York Declaration has. So India, after being newly independent after centuries of colonial plunder, was not ready for this to put a strain on infrastructure and resources of India. So India deliberately did not sign the Refugee Convention and did not have a very clear-cut refugee policy. But at the same time also set a stellar example of hosting refugees from all over the world. Now the big question is, should India change its stand? Should India come up with a refugee law that will be in consonance with the International Refugee Convention? The thing is, because we do not differentiate between foreigners and refugees, this essentially means that the refugees, they depend on the state's discretion, which may take away their basic natural rights. Also, in absence of a legal framework, there is possibility of domestic politicization of refugee issues. The state's discretion is evident in case of Citizenship Amendment Act 2019. The Citizenship Amendment Act 2019, using the wisdom by the government, has given citizenship right to certain section of community from certain countries in the neighborhood. But the act does not address the issue of refugees holistically. The issue essentially has remained at the discretion of the government. Citizenship Amendment Act has not actually created an administrative mechanism to recognize refugees so that they can be registered, they can be given with basic rights of education, health, livelihood, they can be protected from the conditions of persecution, and they can be sent back when the conditions in their homeland normalize. This is how we thought things to be. But in absence of a proper law on refugee, there is no administrative mechanism for this. And essentially, everybody is looked at as foreigners with little or no differentiation between illegal migrant and refugees. So the bottom line is essentially this: we may not join the Refugee Convention of United Nations of 1951, but we must definitely have our own internal refugee policy and refugee administration framework. Now sit back, focus and answer these questions. I'll read the statement for you, and in 5 seconds in your mind you have to process the answer. You have to think of the answer before I tell you the answer. Otherwise you have to buckle up, because everything that I'm going to ask I have taught you already in just last 30 minutes. So you must be able to recall them. Statement 1. India signed the United Nations Convention on Laws of the Sea in 1995. True or false? The statement is false because India ratified it in 1995, signed it in 1982 itself. I hope you didn't get bored. Statement 2. For the first time since 2007, all Quad members together participated in the Malabar exercise in November last year. The statement is true. It was done last in 2007, and after the reservation shown by China, India and even US asked Australia to pull back. But now India does not give a damn about China, and all 4 Quad members did participate in the Malabar exercise. Statement 3. India's criminal laws will apply for any incident happening at 23 nautical miles from Indian baseline. The statement is true. We have seen that till contiguous region, which is 12 plus 12, 24 nautical miles from the baseline, all the criminal laws, all domestic laws will apply, according to both India's Maritime Zone Act 1976 and UNC laws. But after 24 nautical miles, according to UNC laws, coastal nations will only have resource rights. But according to India's Maritime Zone Act 1976, Indian law will still apply even beyond 24 nautical miles in exclusive economic zone. But since I asked you about 23 nautical miles, it will apply according to both UNC laws and India's legislation. If I ask you at 26 nautical miles, then according to Indian law, according to India's stand, it will apply. According to UNC laws, it won't. Statement 4 for you is this: coastal states can control the airspace in the exclusive economic zone. The statement is false. Airspace can be controlled only till territorial sea. Till territorial sea, everything is of government. The heaven above, the water below, and the earth beneath. In the contiguous zone, the state has a right on water. It has a right on the continental shelf, but not in the airspace. And beyond contiguous zone, in the exclusive economic zone, obviously the state cannot control the airspace. Statement 5. Share of direct tax is more than indirect tax in gross tax revenue. Statement is true. In the gross tax revenue, the share of direct tax is 55%, indirect tax 45%, which is good. The share of direct tax must be more because it is more progressive tax. And within direct tax, you must know that the corporate tax is more than income tax. Statement 6. Direct tax collection has increased consistently year on year in the last decade. This statement is almost true. But to answer true or false, you will have to say that this is a false statement. Direct tax collection has increased consistently year on year till 2018-19. In the fiscal year 2019-20, it decreased. So strictly speaking, the statement is incorrect. Statement 7. Laffer curve show relation between tax rates and the amount of tax revenue collected. Very basic, straightforward, it's a true statement. Tax buoyancy for corporate tax is more than personal income tax. We have seen earlier that tax buoyancy for gross direct tax was 1.12 and for corporate tax it was 1. For personal income tax it was 1.32. So tax buoyancy for income tax is more than corporate tax. So the statement is false. India has signed but not ratified Refugee Convention 1951. The statement is false because India has neither signed nor ratified. Statement 10. Citizenship Act 1955 does not define the term refugee. It is a true statement, and that is the basic problem that was highlighted in the lead article today. Statement 11. India has signed and ratified UN Anti-Torture Convention, which has a provision of principle of non-refoulement. This statement is false because India has signed but not ratified. The last statement is New York Declaration for Refugees and Migrants has a provision of financial burden sharing. This is a true statement, and this is one of the reasons why India has agreed to become a party to this declaration. Now we have come to the end of the session. The answer to yesterday's question of the day and today's QOD is there on your screen. Please attempt the question, write the answer in the comment section, have some fruitful discussion, and also attempt the DNS quiz on our ELEARN platform. Thank you very much for spending your 30 minutes with me. Goodbye. Take care.